So let us go forthwith to the phones, where I expect that we probably have on the line intrepid journalist and DSmog blog reporter Steve Horn joining us at this point in time. Is that you, Steve?
That's me. Thanks for having me.
Oh man, thanks for popping in at such short notice. I saw you responding to my line of semi-panicked tweets out there. I'm sorry, Steve. I start flipping out when I see this stuff.
Yeah, we should.
Like these bomb trains. And you handed me some data that sort of made my eyes roll back in my head. So this thing blows up in Lynchburg today. It could have been anywhere on that route, that CSX route. It happened to be Lynchburg. It happened to be downtown. It happened to be near a crowded area. I guess if one was a religious or faithful type, one would say that it was a miracle that a whole bunch of little children in that area down there who were there weren't blown into little tiny hydrocarbon bits. But because it was Lynchburg, it could be anywhere else along that route. Please explain, if you would, because I'm prone to screaming. How? I mean, this stuff's coming from the Bakken crude zone of North Dakota, and it's coming east. At what rate? At what volume? Over what period of time?
Well, yeah, so the Bakken Shale Basin is in North Dakota. The main way, the majority of the oil gets to market, various markets, as I'll explain, not from pipelines, actually, from that particular shale basin, which the oil is obtained from hydraulic fracturing or fracking. It actually goes to market predominantly by rail, trains like CSX or Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and others bring it south, west, and east, as this one got to market from. So that's the main way. East Coast formerly was a huge importer of oil. Now, because of fracking in North Dakota in particular, it may become an export zone. We talked about this a little bit on Twitter. We had it back and forth. Actually, I think I figured out that this oil was headed to a facility owned by Plains All-American, which is also a pipeline company. And their terminal in particular, which is located in Yorktown, Virginia, has been kind of pointed out by the industry as one of the possible places where exports could happen from, because they have an ocean offloading zone. So it's not yet an export facility yet, but this is a big push right now by the American Petroleum Institute and by lots of oil companies, ExxonMobil, and especially the oil majors, to turn the United States basically into an export colony. So this is one of the places where it could happen in the future. And there's a February article in Reuters that covers this that I just tracked down right before the call.
Yeah, I think that because I made a mistake, and I freely admit my mistakes when I make them. I was afraid afraid is the right word. I figured this stuff was headed for the export market because that's what we expect to happen with the Keystone XL tar sands crude, right? It's going to go down to Houston. It's going to get on a boat and go to China. But apparently there's a ban in place, so we're using this to promote freedom. Am I understanding that correctly?
If the oil is produced in the United States, it can't be exported. Some oil products, byproducts can be exported, but crude oil, and especially in 2014, could export U.S. crude oil if ban lifted, and that was February 2014 in Reuters. So business press is covering this. Environmentalists are a little bit behind, although we tend to learn about things after disaster happen, especially in the past year or so with several oil trains exploding. So this is not the only one. I covered another one actually earlier this year in Castleton, North Dakota.
Right, and then there was Pickens County, Alabama, Lock-Meganic. This stuff. And why? I guess that's one of the essential questions, Steve. Why are these trains exploding? What is it about crude oil Because, I mean, for instance, it's illegal, or so I've been told by folks who are intimately familiar with the railroad industry. It's illegal, say, to send tank cars full of gasoline down rail lines, and yet we've had one individual on this program who explained that this stuff is more volatile than gasoline. Is this just an overall transport snare?
It's a multi-pronged issue. Number one, Bakken shale oil has been by the federal government has been basically said to be more volatile than most oils. It's lighter, so it's almost more like a gasoline in its consistency and its chemical composition. So because of that, it has a sort of a lower temperature flash point, and so a lot of that's why a lot of scientists say this has been happening. And number two is this other battle that's going on that's completely related over the type of cars that it's transported in, and that's something called a DOT 111. And these are really outdated cars, decades old, probably not meant to be holding this type of stuff. The walls of it are thinner than they should be. And so, the material is volatile, but also what's holding it, gets more combustible or easier to explode the way they do. So that's another thing that's been happening since, like Lac Megantic, since Castleton, is this battle over whether these rail companies and whether the oil industry will have to, pony up and pay more for updated cars. And so far they've been basically battling not to have to do anything about it, both at the state level and state houses around the country, but also at the federal level. So that's another thing to look out for in the days and weeks ahead, to see if there's increased urgency by the federal government and at the state level to make the rail and oil industry do something about this. As of yet, they haven't had to, and they've been fighting hard not to.
Well, these industries very seldom admit that they've even got a problem. And so it came as a bit of a shock to me when our buddy Dennis down in Kentucky sent me a story from NBC News not that long back, and it references specifically, Steve, those very rail cars that you're talking about, those, what was it, the 111s?
DOT 111.
Yeah, and it says that there's been an upgrade to the cars, but now the rail industry itself is saying that it thinks that thousands of new tank cars that were designed to prevent these explosions may not work.
Well, one of the things that I'll say, that's a good point. The industry has been on the record admitting it. There's an article that I wrote after the Castleton disaster that happened at the end of 2013. I looked at the permit because you can learn things just by looking up where these trains are going. So I looked up where it was headed to, and it was headed to the Mississippi River to be barged down to the Gulf. And in Missouri, where it was going to be put on the Mississippi River, to their Department of Natural Resources, the company that was looking to get the barging down the Mississippi River, admitted that this stuff is more volatile. So that's the industry admitting it on a governmental record that most people just don't look at. So there's probably all kinds of examples of that if you really just started pulling permits and looked closely. But in their public relations, in terms of how they explain it to what most of the public will see, there's no problem. It's A-okay. But the scary thing is that, as you pointed out, these things are traveling across the country, west, south, and east, and these are disasters waiting to happen everywhere across America and North America, because the Lake Megantic one was in Quebec, and these aren't just limited to the United States. The Bakken crude can cross that border. We talked about the international crude export ban. That's not in terms of North America. That's not included. So they can go from the United States to Canada, and so this is also a threat to Canadians. So it's it's both countries, and it's affected both countries.
And the scope of this, though, I read one report out of the Syracuse. Let me find it here. The Syracuse New Times, that says that every 2 hours one of these trains leaves the Bakken crude zone, headed either southeast or southeast. Every 2.5 hours, a train of 100 cars leaves North Dakota laden with crude oil, the report says. And that adds up in a hurry. So, I mean, there's the overarching problem of how do you inform the public? How do you make people aware? Because if as CSX says, this particular train left Chicago bound, and I love this part, Steve. They said it left Chicago. Well, that's fairly specific. And then it just said bound for Virginia. As if they were just going to pull off to a siding as soon as they crossed the state line and wait for somebody to come get it. But it was bound for Virginia, and if I understand CSX correctly, that's probably the same rail line that I've ridden between, say, Thurmond, West Virginia, and Chicago. It's the same rail line that the Amtrak Cardinal runs on. It goes through Chicago, it goes through Illinois, it goes through Indiana, Kentucky. It crosses the Ohio River back into West Virginia. It goes. That very train probably traveled through the incredibly beautiful national park region of the scenic New River Gorge of West Virginia.
Well, I mentioned those two things that have been the main battles, the DOT 111, and the other thing I mentioned. But the third thing that I haven't mentioned is that these bomb trains, as activists have called them, essentially have been clogging up the rail lines. So the commuter rail, for example, has been delayed. Lots of lines have been delayed. So we're talking about oil on the rail. It's kind of this contradiction that you see. Basically, oil on the rail is stopping something that would actually be environmentally friendly, which is people taking trains. So people wanting to take trains when there's these huge delays because of the bomb trains. So, I mean, that's a really good point. But
Steve, these trains never. You seldom see these trains running behind, say, the Greenbrier Resort or the McMansions of the 1%, wherever they are. But they darn sure run through little former coal company shanty towns. The trains always run along near the least economic. It's usually.
I will say Lynchburg happens close to Washington D.C. So, especially policymakers. So I think that this could serve potentially as a wake-up call, based on the fact that so many of these trains are headed towards the East Coast. And one other really important thing is that a CSX rail proposal is actually happening right now in D.C. Actually, one of them, one of these trains with oil may go through D.C. That's been debated at the D.C. City Council level. So this is definitely, I think this will definitely serve as a wake-up call.
And the Congress has sat around and done a little bit of congressional hand-wringing, I think in the Senate in particular, if I'm not mistaken. But nothing has come of that yet, has it?
No, not yet. But at the bureaucratic level, the agencies that oversee the rail, there is movement, there is talk about what to do about it, and there's obviously a lot of counter pressure by the industry to do nothing about it. But, I mean, it's been because I've had to, because of these disasters. There's been a lot of discussion at the bureaucratic level about how to handle this and what to do next, and we'll see what happens after Lynchburg. But I mean, I think that it will be a big wake-up call based on the fact that it was so close to Washington, D.C., and the fact that this same company is proposing sending its oil through Washington, D.C.
Is this also being used, Steve, as an argument to say, well, that's why we need to build more pipelines?
Certainly. Yeah, it sure is. Definitely. I mean, that's what talk about the Senate level. John Hoeven, GOP senator in North Dakota, for example, has gone on the record, in hearings talking about how this is why we need Keystone XL and other pipelines like it, so that these disasters can't happen. So they just use it. People like him and the people who fund him, which is the oil and gas industry, they use it as an opportunity to promote pipelines. Which they have their own problems. That's a discussion for a different day. But yeah, it's certainly.
Yeah, Mayflower, Arkansas comes to mind.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out to you, and this is just by way of connection making, Steve, you might want to talk to or contact on Facebook an old friend of the program by the name of John Wathen, Wathen. He went up to Castleton, North Dakota, and he doesn't live far from Pickens County, Alabama. And this guy is an intrepid investigator of this kind of stuff. I imagine you two could probably become fast friends on this issue, because you mentioned that Lynchburg was about the biggest town that one of these things had happened in yet. When I talked to John Wathen some months back about the Castleton disaster, I mean, these things are disasters when they happen. One of the things that he pointed out was there are Bakken crude trains that cross a truly rickety old trestle over the Black Warrior River into Tuscaloosa, Alabama, every day. And so, I mean, that's one of those things, I guess, just from a, I don't know, from a poet's sensibility or whatever it is that I have, that I think about. It's little towns we're going to learn about only because we never thought about them until something blew up there. And
precisely, yeah.
And I wonder what recourse do they have? And I started thinking, and I put it out on the Twitter feed earlier today, as you probably saw. A bunch of this stuff poured into the James River and caught fire. So now Lynchburg can add its name to that of Cleveland, of cities in America whose river has caught fire. And at one point, the local station that was covering this stuff said, yes, there are cars, plural, and one person said several rail cars in the river.
In the river, yep. Iconic picture now up on Twitter, probably has gone viral at this point, of that happening. And should add that the city, right now the city can't drink its own water, so that's another crisis.
Well, and that's exactly where I was going. How about the people downstream of this stuff? Have they? I'm sensitive to this now because of the Freedom Industries disaster. Did they shut off their intakes? They
did, and they did in Lynchburg. And one thing worth mentioning is that this James River connects to the Chesapeake Bay tributary. So, we are only beginning to learn about what impacts this has.
So this stuff has the potential to go all the way to the Chesapeake Bay.
It has. I can't say for certain because no one's calculated how much oil, and at this point they're still trying to put out the fire they've contained, but they haven't yet fully put out the fire that's on the train right now. So unfortunately, because of how bad that is, the water damage is playing second fiddle right now. But now that oil that was in the train that's now these cars that are in the river, oil is spilling into the river. So it's still super early, and I don't want to say that it's Freedom Industries take two, but I do want to say that it's definitely alarming.
Well, in terms of pure numbers, how many gallons of this stuff does one rail car hold?
There's two key statistics. Where it was headed, the Yorktown facility intakes, it has the capacity to intake roughly 160,000 barrels of oil per day. I think these trains usually carry about 100,000 barrels of oil between the cars, and the cars are usually sometimes up to, the trains are usually sometimes up to 100 cars long, depending on the car. And I think that this Yorktown was probably about average, about 100. I don't know if this one in particular that exploded was that long, but the news reports were saying that it was a really long train. So I'm guessing that it was maybe around that long. So that's a long way of saying that there's quite a bit of oil that are on these trains. And
does the aging and poorly maintained railroad infrastructure in this country play into this problem as well, Steve?
Yeah, so that goes back to the DOT 111 issue. And the Sightline Institute in Washington has done a lot of watchdogging of this. And Eric DePlace, who's their policy director, basically has said that the industry, even if they do add new infrastructure, updated infrastructure to the DOT 111, which is decades old. They have never said that they're going to take those ones off the rail. So it would just be in addition to what's already on the rail, which is, again, frightening because these are the things that are exploding. We don't know, and one thing I do want to add, we don't know for sure if this was a DOT 111, but the Huffington Post did report that they said it was maybe one, and it's almost, I would say, 99% likely that it was, because those are the main things that carry these at this point, and the industry hasn't moved to update the infrastructure.
Well, for a progressive audience like the Horn Family Commune congregation here, are there any progressive or even remotely progressive
states that were impacted, like North Dakota? People like, interestingly, John Hoeven, who I just mentioned, even though he's saying on one hand we need to do more pipelines because of these rail cars, people at the state of North Dakota are also coming in support of Democrat to have to talk about it, or maybe he will talk about it. So it'll be interesting to see what unfolds after this, given how close it was to D.C.
Well, it will be interesting, and I really appreciate Steve
on this debate over the DOT 111, because that's kind of the future of this issue. And I guess from here, just be interesting and kind of hopeful that not too much damage to the water in the area, because it's drinking water for a lot of people. So
and maybe for just people to be alert to these things. I mean, just
that's another thing. Yeah, listeners, I would say, I mean, if this doesn't serve, this should serve as a wake-up call to, at the local level, look at what rail cars are traveling through.
Yeah, and if you're east of North Dakota in particular, is there a do you happen to know the hazmat classification or the placard number that goes with this stuff? Because that has to be displayed on the cars, right?
It does have to be displayed in the cars. I don't know it off the top of my head. Although, yeah, it is a common, on each one it would be the same, classified by the Department of Transportation. So I guess I would just say that's something everyone can do at the local level if they want to be active in their communities, and they're interested in this issue, which I think we all should be, given what the reverberations of not caring about it could be. We should be looking at what's traveling through our communities, and if there's lots of these trains passing by your community, that's probably an issue to raise with local politicians, where you have the most power anyway, where you have your voice heard the loudest is at the local level. D.C. is flooded by so much corporate money. They're basically the root of the problem of why this issue is even happening. So at the local level, that's where citizens can exercise their power. That's what I recommend.
Well, you may get a kick out of this as we wrap up this conversation, for which I am very grateful, Steve. You may get a kick out of this. Right as I saw that this was happening, naturally, I ran right over to the CSX website, because I bear no great love for CSX in the first place, because they're the ones who haul away, who have hauled away in excess of 500 Appalachian mountains that have been blown to rubble and communities poisoned, and, well, you know everything that goes with mountaintop removal. So I ran right over to the CSX website just to check out what they were saying, and they were saying nothing. It took about an hour and a half before they acknowledged anything had happened on their website. But I happened to see that their banner that pops up the minute you log on is at CSX, and, kind of try not to laugh too loud. At CSX, every day is Earth Day.
Oh, man. Yeah, well, they're a step ahead of Plains All American, where at the Yorktown facility where this stuff was headed, they haven't acknowledged anything yet. There've been kind of an oath of silence by them, even though I think it will soon come out through wider media that that's where the oil was headed.
Yeah, we don't know nothing about transporting no Bakken crude.
Yeah, we don't know any. Yeah, exactly. Instructions from the top say nothing, hear nothing.
Exactly. Well, Steve Horn, thank you very much. I wish you as ever well in your endeavors. You're doing some great work, and every time something posts over at DSmog Blog, we try to get it up on the Horn website so that folks can read it, because If one depends on the for-profit media for actual journalism, one is pretty well toast. And so we all really appreciate the work you're doing, because it's obvious that it's hard work. It's obvious that you're pouring your heart and your soul and your time into it, doing real journalism. And I don't know how often people say, "Hey, Steve, we're really glad you do what you do." But hey, Steve, we're really glad you do what you do.
Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate the kind words.
It's a pleasure. You have a wonderful evening. Still up there in Madison?
You too. I still am. Yep.
All right. Well, spring will get there, right?
At some point. Still winter though.
Oh, Jesus, please no.
Yeah, not really, but yeah, not too warm.
Well, I follow your running exploits too, so it's been a tough winter, I know. Well, do take care and hold out for the warm stuff.
We'll do. Take
All right.
care.
Bye now. Steve Horn from Madison, Wisconsin, writer at the Smog Blog, and like I said, I try to always post his work at headonradionetwork.com. I hope that gives you, through all the buffering, I hope that gives you a broader sense of what is at stake with all of this. And, you know, just strap in and be ready when they say, well, that's why everybody needs a pipeline in the backyard. Because, again, it's a situation with one of those false dichotomies in it. Well, we can either transport this stuff by rail bombs, or we can transport this stuff by pipeline bomb. Which bomb would you like to have? And it never occurs to any of these folks that maybe there's a better way. Because money. That maybe we need to start, using our great big human brains, start trying to figure out a way to live a so-called modern existence in a hydrocarbon-free fashion. I think, for instance, of Brother Albert, the sage of Southwest Wisconsin, who is enamored of Tesla motors and has passed that fascination along to me. I'd love to have one of those. By the end of 2015, there will be charging stations all across the United States so that you can get in your Tesla and drive it from coast to coast and never be inconvenienced any more than 30 minutes for recharging time at a Tesla supercharger, where, incidentally, the supercharging is always free. Can you imagine buying a gasoline-powered automobile where they tell you that the gasoline's always free? I mean, if one of these things costs $40,000, $50,000, the fuel cost is going to wipe that out pretty quickly, isn't it? Well, I'm pleased, thanks to Robert in Australia, I'm pleased to know that the link from Yahoo's Australian version, Yahoo News Australia, with the simple observation Robert offers of, Jesus, Bob. Yeah, let's hope you're far enough away, Robert, that there's no Bakken crude to be found in the outback or anything. You don't want this stuff. It is a reposting at Yahoo News Australia from Reuters. In its second oil train accident this year, it's only April, CSX said 15 cars on a train traveling from Chicago City to Virginia, big state, somewhere. I mean, just going to, God knows we're not going to stop this thing in West Virginia. The meth tweakers will strip it. Then they'll probably snort the crude. I mean, come on, hillbillies. Chicago City to Virginia, vaguely defined state. And isn't it interesting that they don't want to give you an end location for this? Well, I mean, not that I'm going to, get all Alex Jones and start talking about false flags, but really. And then there's the smoke. A giant plume of black smoke, hot flames, and congratulations, let's talk about polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are the end product of the incomplete combustion of, oil. Now, these things are nothing but just pure cancer, as are ultrafine particles, which, curiously, are also produced as a result of the incomplete combustion of hydrocarbons. And so all over Lynchburg, Virginia today, even if they couldn't see it, all over Lynchburg, Virginia today, and certainly the first responders, and most likely the little children who were over there in, what was it called, the Amazement Center or something, folks were breathing their cancer. I'm not talking about them being cigarette smokers. I'm talking about them just, the non-smokers were breathing them up some cancer today. And it doesn't take much to get you going. Probably takes less polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons to get that mutagenesis going than, well, you get the idea. I mean, it's bad enough we breathe this stuff because of the nature of the world we live in. Another reason I like Tesla Motors, no emissions. Yeah, I know. And then there's that whole 0 to who knows what in who knows how little time, instantaneous torque from an electric motor thing. But I'm often gone again on my car fetish. Officials said there were no injuries. 350 people were, however, evacuated to a half-mile radius. Motorists and pedestrians were told to stay away from downtown. I'm sure journalists, too. It was pretty nearly at the city center. And, yeah, they shut down their city water supply. At least they figured out to do that. They're a few steps ahead of good old West Virginia American Water Company that way. And, yeah, the James River flows to the Chesapeake Bay. And there's a whole lot of James River to flow toward the Chesapeake Bay from Lynchburg, because Lynchburg is kind of in the foothills of the Blue Ridge, of Virginia, that gets sung about in Country Roads, Take Me Home Country Roads, Blue Ridge Mountain, Shenandoah River. Yeah, Country Roads is, of course, a song ostensibly about West Virginia that's really about Virginia. Oh, never mind. Another ironic bit, I heard this when it was being broadcast live. Attorney John Francisco at the law firm of Edmonds and Williams told local TV station WSET that they're on the 19th floor of the something or another bank building where his law firm is located. He heard a loud noise that sounded like a tornado, which kind of tells you where we are in the second decade of the 21st century. It used to be that when you heard a tornado, you said it sounded like a freight train. Now the freight trains sound like tornadoes. Sheesh.